To the microphone. Let's go live to Justin Trudeau as he speaks with reporters.
Holding events in Portageuse, Nova Scotia. I know we've all been watching this on the news. My hearts go out to everyone affected in what is a terrible situation. I want to thank the police for their hard work and people for cooperating with authorities.
I want to say a few words about the tragic situation which is unfolding in Portageuse in Nova Scotia. And my thoughts go to all the people who have been affected by this event. And I want to thank and congratulate all people who have intervened. I want also to convey my wishes for the Orthodox holiday of Easter.
I want to wish a happy Orthodox Easter to everyone who's celebrating today. Even if it's just over Skype, I hope you can spend this special day with family and friends. Although this pandemic has affected everyone, some people have been hit especially hard. Right now, too many Canadians are facing some really difficult situations. If you live with a disability, I don't have to tell you what this can look like. You might be worried about whether your support worker will be able to keep coming. You might be concerned about getting groceries or about your finances. And if you're caring for someone with a disability, you're probably anxious about getting support too. Your voice matters. Your experience is important. And our government is listening. If this crisis has laid bare the gaps that still exist for far too many Canadians, it has also given us an opportunity to address them. It has encouraged us to have even more meaningful conversations about how we can make our country a more inclusive and a more equitable place. Last week, Minister Qualtrough launched a COVID-19 Disability Advisory Group as part of our plan to keep all Canadians healthy, informed, and safe. We're addressing key issues like equal access to health care and information, as well as support on jobs and income. And we're doing all of this work with you at the table. On that note, I want to recognize the outstanding organizations right across the country, like the Rick Hansen Foundation, that are bringing these issues to the fore. You are doing incredible work, and we are proud to be your partner. Last week,
our Minister Qualtrough has set up the consultative group on COVID-19 regarding people who have a handicap and a disability. So we are confronted with an unprecedented situation, and we want to have more equitable access to healthcare and information. We are also supporting financially people who need it, and we have also made provision for the purpose of protecting jobs. This work we carry it out together, and I want to pay tribute to all the leaders and all organizations who call our attention on those particular problems which affect people who are most vulnerable. We're here to be your full partners.
We've developed a 3-point economic plan to help Canadians get through this tough time. We introduced the Canada Emergency Response Benefit to help people who've lost their wages. We brought in new loans for businesses, and we introduced the wage subsidy. But there is still work to do. There are still people to reach. That's why this past week, we expanded the Canada Emergency Response Benefit to include workers making up to $1,000 a month, seasonal workers, and those whose EI has recently run out. It's why we put in place new measures to support people in the energy industry, which is suffering right now. And we also brought in support for people who continue to do incredible work in the arts, culture, and sports communities. And it's why we've kept making progress with the provinces and territories on increasing wages for essential workers who need it. Now, things are tough for employers, too. So we brought in a whole range of additional support on loans and credit, and for Indigenous businesses and businesses in the North. And for communities that need extra support, we approved requests to have the Canadian Armed Forces assist in Quebec long-term care facilities, as well as in Nunavik and in Basse-Côte-Nord. Today, I can announce that we've also approved the extension of a request from the Government of Quebec for the Canadian Rangers to help Nutashquan and Equanichit First Nations near Basse-Côte-Nord. All these measures we've brought in are about helping you do the things that will get us through this. And it's working. We're seeing the numbers trend in the right direction. So we need to keep doing what we're doing and keep being extremely careful. And we will get through this together. Depuis le début de la crise, on a
Since the outset of the crisis, we have announced historic provisions, the emergency assistance, and we help millions of workers, and there are some people whom we must help, additional people whom we must help. This is what we have broadened the scope of the emergency Canadian help, and we continue helping the people who continue in the field of arts, culture, and sports. And we also work with the provinces and territories in order to increase the wages of essential workers who need it. It goes without saying that this is also a difficult period for employers. And this is why we have introduced a whole series of additional measures, including contributions for companies, including indigenous and northern companies, and also for communities which need more help. We have also accepted the request for the deployment of Canadian Armed Forces in Quebec and Nunavik and Basse-Côte-Nord. And I can also announce that the Canadian Rangers will intervene in favor of 2 more communities in Quebec, Nutashquan and Equanichit. So all these provisions were set up for the purpose of enabling you to follow the recommendations of experts and to help us fight the COVID-19, and so the figures are evolving in the right directions. So together we will make it through this crisis. However, even if we emphasize some encouraging trends, we will not delude ourselves. Throughout the country, thousands of families are going through horrible times because of the pandemic. And let me take a minute to convey my condolences of all people who are mourning and grieving, and all Canadians share your sadness, and they are with you during this terrible ordeal. And as a government, we're here we have your backs, and we'll be crossing those difficult times together. And of course, we need to think about these elderly people in those long-term residences who cannot see their children or grandchildren except through FaceTime sometimes, and they're scared. And they hear and they see the news, and they see how awful the situation is in home for elderly people, and they're worried, and they wonder whether they'll be able to see their children and grandchildren again. This is something that makes them grieve, and we should do everything we can in order to work together, and also emphasizing that we must continue to stay home. We must continue to slow down the spread of this virus, and together we'll make it through this crisis.
Because it's Sunday, I want to end again by talking directly to all the kids who might be watching. This week is National Volunteer Week. That means we say thank you to everyone around us doing things like helping seniors get groceries or putting in a shift at a food bank. You can join in from home, too. Ask your parents if you can help them make dinner and do extra cleaning around the house. Help your brother or sister with schoolwork. Say hi over FaceTime to your grandparents who I know are missing you. Young and young at heart, we can all make a real difference. I heard a great story the other day about a restaurant in Nova Scotia, the Canteen. They've turned the restaurant into a community kitchen where people pitch in and get meals to those in need. And there have been thousands of Canadians who've already signed up through our national COVID-19 volunteer recruitment campaign to lighten the load on our frontline workers. Everyone can help out. Everyone can help us get through this. À tous les enfants qui sont à la maison.
To all children who stay at home, do not forget that you are needed. And ask your parents if you can help them cook dinner or clean the house. Help your sister or your brother with homework, and say hello to your grandparents on FaceTime, to your grandparents who miss you. So we can all contribute to making our country a better place. And so through this crisis, we all have a chance to contribute to improving the situation, and we will all do our share together. Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll move to the question period on the phone. Moderator, it's for you.
First question, Michelle Carbert from the Globe and Mail. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. My question is with regards to the government's decision to tighten the scrutiny of foreign takeovers of Canadian firms impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Why is this decision important, and why did you take this decision a month after European countries started doing this?
We recognize that countries around the world are looking at their own regimes and recognizing that there are vulnerable businesses that are going to be important to our recovery, who are perhaps exposed to foreign purchases in a vulnerable time, that we need to be careful we're taking care of. So we will be strengthening our oversight and paying close attention to foreign investment in this country to ensure that there isn't people taking advantage of this crisis. We
recognize how important it is in this economic slowdown, period of economic slowdown, to make sure that people overseas should not decide to take advantage of the situation to buy out or in Canadian companies or investing in them more than they would have if we were not in a situation of vulnerability. This is why we emphasize how important those measures are for the purpose of protecting our industry and our economy.
And as a follow-up, are you aware of any foreign takeover deals that are coming or have occurred since the pandemic? And are there any sectors you're concerned about?
I think we've highlighted that certainly as we look at challenges around supply chains for essential medical supplies and personal protective equipment, as we strengthen our own domestic industry and production, we wouldn't want a foreign investor to be able to take that production that is being made for Canadians in this moment of crisis and send it overseas. We also recognize that there are perhaps some startups with brilliant ideas that are facing a cash crunch right now that we would very much want to remain Canadian for the coming years, who could be exposed to predatory foreign investors. This is something that we're, of course, going to be keeping an eye on.
Thank you. Prochaine question, modérateur.
Thank you, merci. Prochaine question, Lina Dib, La Presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Can you tell us what the status is of negotiations for the resumption of work in the House of Commons? And who will be responsible if we can't do it? Well, we are at the moment concerned about the fact that we've yet to strike an agreement with all parties in order to be able to hold our sessions tomorrow morning. And so tomorrow, on April 20th, we should be able to hold our sittings with 330 MPs and with all the staff surrounding the MPs. So this is not a situation where that should happen. So we need to hold those sessions, and this is why we had very, very good conversations with most parties. So I think we're about to reach an agreement for the purpose of being able to meet each week and be able to ask questions and move forward with our legislation. However, the Conservatives are still doing their best to slow down this reasonable agreement, but we hope that we'll have an agreement soon. And otherwise, you're telling us that it is the fault of the Conservatives, and you've been speaking to the children today because this is Sunday. So what kind of an example are they giving to the rest of the country if they prevent the country of doing what it has to do? Does that mean that federal politicians are just unable to reach an agreement amongst themselves in the interest of the country? Answer. Yes, of course, I agree with you. We were clearly hearing experts telling us that we have to make responsible choices and curb the traveling in the country. So this is why we should not, in our view, hold traditional sessions. And I believe it is very important to continue to have our democratic institutions at work and to keep democracy going. And I believe that we should be selecting opportunities and give MPs from the opposition the opportunity to ask questions. Therefore, we are making proposals which are reasonable and seen as reasonable by all other parties, but ask the Conservatives what their approach is and why they are trying to obstruct and why they're unreasonable in this business.
A situation right now where our public health authorities, our experts, and common sense tells us we need to continue to limit our movements, we need to continue to work from home, we need to continue to do everything we can to ensure that people are kept safe from further spread of this pandemic. That's why it would be irresponsible for the House of Commons to resume tomorrow as scheduled on April 20th. With 338 MPs, their staff, support staff in the House of Commons, security, people coming in from across the country at this particular point. We have proposed, and it's been accepted by, largely accepted by the other opposition parties, that we should have accountability measures. We should have Parliament that functions, but we have to do it responsibly. And that's why coming back every week for questions and for work on passing new legislation is something that I think is reasonable and is acceptable to most parties. I believe deeply in our democracy, in our democratic institutions, and our principles, and it's important to be accountable. I'm perfectly happy to be taking questions every day from media, and I'm looking forward to taking questions from opposition parties. But it has to be done in a responsible way, and right now the Conservatives are not taking a responsible approach.
Thank you, merci. Modérateur, prochaine question.
Merci, thank you. Next question, Libertium, Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Yes, Prime Minister, thanks for talking to us. The NDP is asking for, in terms of parliamentary sittings, 1 in-person day and 2 virtual sittings. You have proposed only 1 virtual sitting. Can you explain why 2 is unacceptable?
I think it is important that we have in-person sittings, and I think 1 a week seems about the right number in a reduced fashion. But we also have been clear from the very beginning that we think there should be virtual sittings to allow parliamentarians from across the country who aren't within driving distance of Ottawa to continue to participate. And that's why we have been pushing for virtual sittings. We have heard from the House of Commons administration that they are incapable of standing up virtual sittings for this coming week, but we are very open to increasing them over the subsequent weeks because it's important that we be able to hear from all parliamentarians.
Follow-up?
And as a follow-up, there's a report of a deal that has been reached. Can you confirm that a deal has been reached with the opposition parties?
I can't confirm anything like that. As I came out this morning, I heard that we were very close on it, but I haven't in the past half hour got notice that there is a deal. I think it seems very, very reasonable that we can agree that there needs to be a parliament that is functioning responsibly in this difficult time. Most parties have responsible proposals forward, and I certainly hope that the Conservatives will agree to doing the responsible thing here.
Merci. Modérateur, dernière question au téléphone.
Last question on the phone.
La prochaine question, Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous la parole.
Oui, bon dimanche, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Good Sunday, Mr. Prime Minister. Can you explain to us what those virtual sessions would look like? Well, the House is at the moment examining a number of proposals. So the idea would be to enable MPs across the countries to ask questions and make speeches through video conferencing with the same entitlement to take the floor and length of speech as would be the case if there were traditional sessions. However, regarding we've yet to finalize technological arrangements for the purpose of being able to do it. In your speech, you have emphasized that thousands of families are going through very, very difficult times, and Premier Legault said that his government has been ill-prepared to confront the crisis, and there will be time for a post-mortem period or examining an after-the-fact examination of what happened. Was your government prepared for the crisis? Well, I believe that when we go through a tragedy just like the one that we are going through, nobody can say that we were perfectly prepared, and we hope that this will not repeat itself. But if that should be the case, I hope that we'll be better prepared. And I do know that Canadians at the various levels of government and everybody, well, they certainly did all their best together for the purpose of protecting people with all the means we had at our disposal. And I believe that we fared rather well relative to other countries. So this is a tragedy, and this is such a horrible tragedy that we're all going through, but a horrible tragedy for many families. So we must do our best for the purpose of exiting this tragedy without more tragedies. Radio Canada. Can you elaborate on the manner in which you think that 3 sittings of a reduced number of MPs is not reasonable? Well, if we want to look at things the way they are, we have to acknowledge that many people cannot come and attend sessions of the House because they live too far. So this is why we recognize how important it was to hold virtual sessions for the purpose of bringing to the House virtually all people who are entitled to contribute to our discussions and debates. And we also want to be in the House for the purpose of answering their questions, although virtually. This is important for democracy. It's a good thing to be able to answer questions from journalists and media in general day after day, but parliamentarians also have the same right to ask questions. So most parties agree that this would be what we're suggesting is a reasonable compromise.
I think it's extremely important that we remember that people are elected to Parliament in every corner of this country to be their community's voice in Parliament. And that's why, particularly in a time of crisis, it is important to look at virtual ways that allow members from every corner of the country to engage in parliamentary debate and discussion, and not just those who have the opportunity or the proximity to be around the National Capital Region. That's why we've been pushing the virtual sittings. We know that accountability is important, and taking questions every day from the media is a good thing, but it is also important that parliamentarians and opposition politicians get to ask questions of the government, which is why we've proposed that the Parliament sit every week in a reduced fashion, and that is a proposal that was accepted by most parties. The Conservatives still need to work on it a little bit in terms of their own reflection.
Est-ce que vous seriez ouvert quand les outils virtuels seront disponibles?
Once the virtual tools are ready, would you be open to holding several virtual sessions per week? Because so far, given the nature of your proposal, opposition parties could not, for several days a week, ask questions. They cannot do it every day. Would you be willing to hold several virtual sessions a week? I can assure you that we do take into account the comments and the requests which are made by the opposition parties. Media do know it, and so we are selecting the best possible options, and we're trying to do what is necessary to meet the real requirements throughout the country. We're always open to work at Parliament, but we have to do it in a reasonable, cautious manner. And this is what we're attempting to do, and must again repeat that most parties agreed. Only the Conservatives might perhaps derail the process and force us to meet again tomorrow and not have 338 members.
Parliament that you believe in accountability. So why is your party still haggling at the last minute over terms of this sitting? Why is this so complicated?
We have been consistent from the very beginning, from a number of days ago, where I said we have a proposal to bring back Parliament every single week and ensure that we're expanding and looking at virtual sittings as quickly as we can. This has been our position, and we're consistently on that position. Most opposition parties found this to be reasonable. There is one party, and because the House is scheduled to resume tomorrow morning, there is required to be unanimous consent by the parties to not come back tomorrow morning, and the Conservatives are not wanting to be reasonable in this, I think.
Australia and other countries are calling for an international and an independent investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 outbreak in China. You've said this is not the time to point fingers or assign blame, but are you supportive of this investigation in the future? And do you still believe China responded and reported adequately?
I think it's extremely important that we understand exactly what happened and ask really tough questions of all countries involved, including China. This is something that we need to pursue. But my priority right now, and the priority for countries around the world, needs to be doing everything we can to keep our people safe and make sure that we have the resources necessary to protect our citizens and get through this, and that will always be my focus.
We recognize that there are important questions that need to be asked. We need to see what happened and how, and what responsibility countries have in this, and that includes China. But the priority for myself and other leaders has to remain what we do to keep our citizens safe.
Ian Wood, CTV News. Prime Minister, a correctional facility near Montreal has confirmed dozens of COVID-19 cases, and the same is true with other facilities across the country, including one near Vancouver. What are you doing to protect the incarcerated population and the corrections staff in these facilities to stop the spread of COVID-19?
From the beginning, Corrections Canada has taken measures to protect both inmates and staff in these facilities, including eliminating visits, reducing transfers, looking at measures including staggered timetables to keep inmates and staff more separate from each other, ensuring that there are different mechanisms in place, and those reflections are ongoing. We're always looking for new ways to ensure protection of Canadians in those facilities.
And some provinces have had to cut elective procedures in hospitals to prepare and manage COVID-19 patients or prepare for them. Canada already has long wait lists for some procedures. Is the federal government going to assist provinces to make sure that these existing backlogs aren't amplified once we're through this?
We have a tremendous amount of confidence that provinces are going to be able to continue to manage their healthcare systems appropriately. We sent them $500 million in new resources to ensure that they are able to continue to deal with this crisis. One of the key elements through this crisis was ensuring that if more and more people got infected, there would still be emergency beds for them. There would still be intensive care units available to them to deal with the very real challenges of COVID-19 and prevent the death rates from skyrocketing as they have in other countries where their medical systems were overwhelmed. I think Canadians understand how important it is to make it through this crisis as quickly as possible so we can get back to normal. But getting through it as quickly as possible means being very careful about what we are doing right now to maximize our opportunity to help as many Canadians if they get infected.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. In Austria, for example, they have a plan to get businesses reopened, and they're doing it in a 2-week process. They open a business, a small business, monitor for 2 weeks. If the cases don't go up, they continue then with hotels, restaurants, etc. Provinces here in Canada, there are some that are have plans that they're announcing on how they're going to do that. I'm wondering what the coordination is between your government and the provinces. Will the federal government put a plan up as well? And what are you saying in terms of which businesses should be able to reopen first and when?
Many of the decisions around what makes sense in terms of a careful restarting of the economy are much more appropriately made at the provincial level, given both provincial authorities and the reality that the shape of this pandemic is very, very different in different parts of the country. What we are working on coordinating with the provinces is a set of principles and approaches that can be applied at different moments and in different ways across the country. We want to be there to ensure that there is testing capacity, that we are supporting on contact tracing, that we are remaining consistent in the messages that Canadians are hearing from the different orders of government across the country about how to be very, very careful to not allow for a resurgence of COVID-19 just as restrictions start being eased. These conversations are very much live with the provinces right now. We are listening very carefully to what experts and looking very carefully at what is working and has worked in other jurisdictions and seeing how and if that can be adapted to us. We recognize from the beginning that we have been slightly slower. We were able to hold off the pace of the virus in Canada for a few more weeks than many other places, and therefore we can take advantage of learning what works in different situations to adapt it to Canada. We are being extremely thoughtful about that easing, and again, people need to know it's not going to suddenly reopen in any part of the country overnight to what it was before. We're going to have to be very, very careful, very gradual, very progressive if we are to prevent the kind of resurgence that would send us all back into lockdown as we were before. We want to make sure that what we are doing now is not for nothing, that we manage to get through this with the kind of containment and control approaches that the proper measures will allow for. Okay. Nous savons que les gens veulent savoir quand ça va se passer, qu'on va pouvoir relâcher certaines des restrictions, mais nous devons...
Many people, of course, are wondering when and how we are going to start lifting restrictions, but we have to be very careful, do it gradually, and remain extremely vigilant. We will also be looking at other jurisdictions to see what has worked there and sometimes what challenges they have had to face at different stages. There will be choices to be made in different parts of the country. Those choices may sometimes be different, but as a federal government, we are coordinating the approach so that the principles that underlie the progressive reopening of the economy be consistent across the country.
Alberta oil sands camp has sickened at least 12 people around Alberta, and reports of other cases in other parts of the country from that. Should measures be in place to ensure that returning workers isolate whether or not they have symptoms?
I think that's a decision for the government of Alberta, but certainly we all understand how important it is to keep workers in essential businesses, workers who continue to work, as safe as possible. Safety of workers, of their families as well, needs to be the primary consideration of any government, and I certainly expect that to be the case in this one as well.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.